Before we start our latest Curious conversation, we wanted to let you know that the co-authors of The Curious Advantage, Paul Ashcroft and Garrick Jones, will be attending the World of Learning Summit on January 31st, 2024 at Olympia, London, for a panel discussion on curiosity and purpose leadership. The World of Learning Summit is a conference and exhibition event that brings together leading experts, brands, and professionals from the L&D community under one roof. Joining Paul and Garrick will be longtime friend of The Curious Advantage, Tim Munden, Director of Kron. We invite you to join us on January 31st, 2024 at Olympia, London. The panel discussion is in Conference Room 1 at 1:35 p.m. and afterwards you can meet the authors in the exhibition hall at Stand K 150. Secure your tickets now at learnevents.com.
I keep thinking, what could we do if our primary goal was how do we make the world work? Rather than our primary implicit goal being how do we beat the other guy? And it's like a fundamentally different way of thinking and operating in the world.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-author Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
And we're delighted to be joined by Amy Edmondson. Hi Amy.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Yes, welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast.
Thank you.
So you're the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, ranked number 1 on the latest Thinkers 50 World's Most Influential Management Thinkers, and author of 7 books, this one included, and 60 scholarly papers. So Amy, tell us a little bit about your story and how did you end up here?
I guess through curiosity. Must have kept me going all of these years. Absolutely. And of course, it's true. And it's true in a very fundamental way, in that I think the right answer or the accurate answer to how did I get here is by following my nose, meaning a complete lack of a grand plan, certainly, and a career journey that has involved some serious twists and turns and restarts, and ultimately landed me as a researcher and professor at Harvard, where I've now been for quite a long time.
And over that time, how do you see that sort of management and leadership has changed our reality, changed the world since you started?
Do you mean how our ideas about management
I guess
and
how our
leadership
understanding and observations around management and leadership.
I think there's a growing chorus, a growing and broadening chorus of writings and speakings and just plain old recognition that the world we are operating in is a very complex, uncertain, interdependent place, such that, as Churchill apparently once said, plans are worthless, but planning remains essential. So I think the new leadership mindset is one that has a great deal more in common with scientific mindset than the management mindset of old. The management mindset of old was one that essentially broke things down into parts and then found the ways to manage and measure the parts as accurately as possible so as to ensure execution to spec. Whereas today, I think fewer and fewer of us are under the illusion that we have that kind of clear line of sight looking forward. So management and leadership today are more about setting the hypothesis about where we need to head and what that might involve, and helping people take bold forays into new territory and helping them make sense of sometimes puzzling data. So again, it sounds an awful lot more like being a principal investigator than being an old-fashioned manager.
I think we fully agree with that. And you mentioned this at the start, that curiosity led you to where you've got to today. And you mentioned the mindset of the leader changing. What's the role of curiosity in the mindset of a leader these days? How important is it?
I don't think you can be a leader without a good leader without curiosity, because if as I described, the sort of ideal leader is part principal investigator or akin to leading a robust scientific undertaking, then they had better be very curious about the data, right? Very curious about what people whom they are leading and managing are discovering out there in that new world that we're trying to succeed in, right? So curiosity plays a central role, because it's without, I think you didn't need curiosity in the older models of management. You needed deadlines and deliverables and targets, and then you could easily check whether or not reality was matching up to those. But that didn't require curiosity. Curiosity is how you approach reality when you say, I really need and want to learn from what's actually happening rather than from what my hopes and predictions were for what would be happening.
Is there someone in particular that you admire or you think does this really well, who gets it? Who leads with curiosity in your view?
Well, I think many people lead with curiosity. Probably, a couple that come to mind because they're so different would be Ed Catmull and Alan Mulally, right? They're one's in, very creative enterprise of sort of computer animated films, Pixar, and the other is, an automotive turnaround, now retired, but at Ford Motor Company. And yet I think both could be easily described as full of curiosity in a genuine sense.
And what does that look like? So it's great to have role models to sort of. Yeah. So what have you seen or sort of observed that shows that curiosity?
Well, it's two things. One simpler, one structural, and the simple one is just they ask a lot of good questions. They just ask questions, right? If you're curious, you will not have to remind yourself to ask good questions, which, by the way, is good leadership practice. But curiosity will naturally drive question asking. And the structural one is sort of setting in place rituals and activities that require sharing knowledge, data, experience, whether those are, weekly executive committee meetings that are designed to share what's going on, seek and offer help, or Pixar's brain trust process, which is a intermittent process to kind of take a look at the developing product and critique it and figure out where it's falling short and where it could be better.
Amy, you said in the intro that your path has led you down a few rabbit warrens along the way. And I know one of the things that you write about is psychological safety. So if we're going to be curious and we have a problem, or we go down a rabbit warren and start to discover that things are going not quite the way we want, how does psychological safety play a role in that? And what can we do to help people be more successfully curious?
Well, I suppose it makes sense to think of curiosity as an individual phenomenon. Individuals are curious and they bring that curiosity to their team. Let's say I've got curiosity, I've been nurturing curiosity, and I come to a team where there isn't a sense of psychological safety, by which I mean a sense that you can speak up openly without fear of humiliation or rejection. And so if I'm curious, I want to ask questions, but if I think asking questions will make me look bad in this particular group, I'm just going to be stymied in my ability and desire to do that. So, curiosity will flourish in a psychologically safe environment. Also, if I'm curious, I'm willing to experiment. If I'm willing to experiment, things will sometimes go well and sometimes go wrong. And that too, I will not be so willing to do if I don't perceive my environment to be a psychologically safe environment for those kinds of experiments and questions and missteps and dissenting views and all the rest. So curiosity and learning are hand in hand. And psychological safety is all about, really, it's just fundamentally an environment where learning is possible.
It was something I read this morning. It was a survey, I think, of 4,000 leaders, and it was along the lines of things I wish people had told me that they never did. And one of those was along the lines of, as a leader, I don't need to know the answer. And
right.
I guess many of us feel we do need to know the answer. And what I'm hearing from you with the questions piece is actually, if we're asking great questions, we don't need to know the answer.
Oh, yeah.
We can use our experience, our intuition to ask great questions. But
that's the very first thing. If I put up a chart in my head of, the old-fashioned management 101 versus, think like a scientist, the top row would be has answers, has questions.
Yes.
I don't need to know the answers, but I am responsible for coming up with good questions.
Yes. Yeah. And it's from my experience and from my knowledge and everything else that helps me to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think one of the jobs of a leader is to help others develop the ability to ask good questions. Right. That is a skill, and it's helpful. I mean, it's one that can be nurtured.
So we've had quite a few conversations on this podcast over the last few months around generative AI and the change in the world, I guess, that is coming as that. Through your new book and I guess your research of the old book, how are you suggesting to leaders, and maybe it's a leading question coming from what we were just talking about, but how are you advising and guiding leaders or organizations to navigate through the unknown that comes from generative AI?
It's a little bit of a leading question, but not really, because I think there's different ways to take it. And I mean, maybe this is the leading part. It's got to start with genuine curiosity, because I think there's a natural tendency and desire to say, okay, I'm gonna conquer this thing, right? I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna become expert. I'm gonna know what's going on, rather than to think, I wonder what this might be good at. I wonder what this might help with. I wonder where the risks and dangers might be. And so to be approaching all of the opportunity that lies ahead from a place of I wonder is a far more powerful approach than one that says, okay, we're gonna wrestle this one to the ground.
Amy, in the Right Kind of Wrong, you talk about these three main types of failure: simple, complex, and intelligent. Basic, complex, and intelligent. Could you tell us about each one and maybe give us an example of what you mean by these?
Yeah. So basic failure is a single cause failure and in known territory, in familiar territory. And so, a kind of a tragic example of a basic failure was Air Florida Flight 90 back in 1982, where the cockpit crew failed in the middle of a winter storm to use the anti-icing, because they went through the checklist in a rote manner, said anti-icing off, check, and then just went on as if, did it in their proverbial sleep. So that simple mistake led to the basic failure of an airplane crashing into the Potomac River and the massive loss of life that entailed. So it's, basic failures can be tiny. You sort of forget to charge your cell phone and miss an important meeting, or they can be, enormous, like the one I just described. But they are in terrain that is well understood, and you make a mistake. And complex failures are the proverbial perfect storm. They're the multi-causal failures that are caused by a combination of factors coming together in just the wrong way, where any one of the factors on their own would not lead to a failure. But the fact of them lining up because of the complexity of our lives and our systems and so forth lead to complex failures. There's so many, again, I guess to stick with aviation, the Boeing 737 MAX crashes, both of them were complex failures, multi-causal, not simple, not single, but a whole set of factors truly unfolding over a long period of time. And I go into detail in the book about that. But there's also, of course, less tragic examples of complex failures at work and in life. And then the third kind, which is the right kind of wrong, are intelligent failures. And these are the still undesired but thoughtful forays into new territory. Right? So an intelligent failure is one that is in pursuit of a goal in new territory, with a hypothesis. You've done your homework. You've got good reason to believe this uncertain experiment might work, and alas, it doesn't. And they are as small as possible. You're not betting unnecessary time, resources on something that may not work, right? So you make it be the size it needs to be to get new knowledge, but no bigger. So a clinical trial, thoughtful clinical trial, you've engaged the right number of patients to test the efficacy of a new compound that we hope will work, and our science suggests it will, but we run the trial and alas, the drug fails to show efficacy. That is an intelligent failure. There was no other way to get that information than to try it. You couldn't just look into your crystal ball.
And then what do we do with those intelligent failures? Because I guess part of them being intelligent is we don't leave them there.
Yes. Yeah. You're not done. You're not done yet, right? So,
yeah.
And of course, careers are full of intelligent failures too. But the intelligent failure, what we do with them is we learn from them. We learn as much as we can, as quick as we can, and use that information to design the next experiment. And so, the next experiment may be a success, or it may be a failure again, but it'll be a new failure. It won't be the same old failure. It will have been informed by this one.
Why is it so hard for organizations to grasp this? Because
I know, because it's so obvious, right? It's so crazy, isn't it? I think I think there's two answers. One is psychology, and two is incentives. So psychologically, we still have this sad human preference for success over failure. No, that's not all that sad, but it can lead us astray, right? It can lead us to make errors of our own making. So we're reluctant to do the smart experiments in the safe ways we could do them to then have more successful real launches, let's say, real product launches. So we don't do our homework to get the kinks out of the system in a timely way. And then of course, incentives compound on that, because the incentives kind of at every level and in every project, we want everything to go well, rather than having the incentives be lined up to say, okay, find out where it doesn't work, and find out quickly so that we can then correct and pivot and go forward.
Is this what you mean by like a smart pilot, Amy? Some of the
Yes.
things that you were talking about there.
Yes.
Tell us more. What's a smart pilot as opposed to just we're going to have a go and see what happens?
A not smart pilot is like a demonstration project, right? It shows, here's this new thing and look how great it is. And it's great because you've rigged it to be great. You've over invested in it. So a smart pilot would be one that you do find the bits that don't work. So it would be one that first of all, the test is in as representative conditions. It's not sort of an idealized, let's get our best people on it and too many of them. Representative of reality, of the real operating environment. It's one in which people are not, there's no incentives to sort of have a success of the pilot. There's incentives to learn from the pilot. Again, so that you can tweak and make the project better. And it's clear to everyone that, this isn't just to prove, it's to learn. And generally, a successful pilot would be one that you, at the end of it, you now know 5 things to change, some number of things to change to make it better. So if you don't have anything to change after the pilot, it probably wasn't a very good pilot.
But setting that up, if I look at how over many, many years you set up pilots, the perception at the end of the pilot has, if I think historically, always been the thing works and proves the bigger piece, so you then take the commitment on the bigger piece.
Right.
So
Right.
again, this needs a change in our thinking, I guess.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Because we designed it to succeed,
Yes.
right? To prove. It was are you working to prove or to learn? And they're at odds, because proving will lead you to kind of cover up the wrinkles and
Exactly.
and to sort of overcompensate for the weaknesses.
And I saw you talk about that in the book around how the team wants the pilot to succeed, and therefore in the pilot everything is successful, but then in reality it doesn't work. Why? Because the team glossed over things and made it work. But that's going to require a major shift in all of our thinking as we set up pilots.
Right.
And are you seeing people embracing that in your conversations so far, or?
Yes, it's as you said before, Simon, it's in a way, I think everybody gets it intellectually. It's just, can we put it into place emotionally and from an institutional incentives point of view, right? So we get the logic. We're living and operating in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, right? So we need to have smart experiments. We need smart pilots. But then everything in us is like, well, mine's going to be the exception, right? Mine's going to be perfect right out of the gate, illogical though that may be. So we need to work together to kind of overcome our natural foibles in that sense.
Hey, my love, you talk about how to turn strangers into a team. It's one of my favorite talks that you gave. But also to extend that, about how do you build effective communities? I think that's what people are wondering these days, even beyond their own organization. What are some of the things you've learned about that?
Oh, Paul, it's such a nice connection, because it is, in fact, if you the how to turn strangers into a team is really about learning, right? It's fast learning about and from each other. It works when I'm curious about who you are, what you bring, and what you're up against, and willing also to share vulnerably, honestly, that about myself. So then suddenly we have something akin to a real relationship because of that honesty. I've told you what I'm worried about. I told you what I'm trying to get done. I told you what I think some of my strengths are, and I've heard yours. So that those kinds of relationships start with mutual learning and then allow us to move forward to learn together and sort of conquer the uncertainty that lies ahead.
Does that also then require the creation of that psychological safety to be open, I guess, about those traits and share?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, I don't think you sort of, let's step back, let's create psychological safety, then let's get to work. It's more, we create psychological safety by getting to work. And when I think about those relationships, building relationships with strangers, as it were, there's a gradient, right? You might start with, well, here's the goal that, my department wants me to be achieving. That's pretty easy to share. My concerns, that's a little, the things I'm up against, the things I'm worried about, my anxieties, that's a little harder. And then, my strengths, the things I think I offer, that's harder still. But we ratchet up the sharing, we ratchet up the learning. And if it goes well, we've built psychological safety as a byproduct.
And something, I hope I'm not misquoting you here, but something that I've heard you reference at some point is how psychological safety is often misused as a term and
yes.
sort of misattributed. So can you tell us more about that?
Sigh, big sigh. Yes, because, I guess, I came at this research so many years ago with this fundamental interest in learning, quality improvement, and ultimately innovation and so on. So I come at this with a learning lens, and I realized that often the interpersonal climate makes it hard to learn, makes it hard for us to learn. So that was my interest, that was my sort of discovery. And I still care about those things, first and foremost. And so it's upsetting when people take psychological safety to mean we must be nice to each other. Because nice often means holding back the truth, right? And not being candid. Whereas to me, psychological safety is about felt permission for candor. Psychological safety does not mean that I should expect a round of applause for every utterance, right? It doesn't mean that I should feel, comfortable, and nobody should push me or stretch me harder. And I think, probably the simplest way to put this is that no, psychological safety is really not about being comfortable. It's about knowing that it's okay to be a little uncomfortable because of what's at stake, right? Because of the sort of the challenging work that we're trying to do together. So that let's not let interpersonal discomfort get in the way of excellence in our chosen field here.
So it's actually creating permission to, and a comfort with discomfort.
Yes, it is. It's a comfort with discomfort, and we get to. Fortunately, what makes it more palatable is the mutuality of it, right? That we get to kind of support each other in that learning environment.
So we're talking with Amy Edmondson. Amy is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School, a chair that was established to support the human interaction that leads to the creation of successful enterprises for the betterment of society. She's author of 7 books and over 60 scholarly papers published in academic and management outlets such as Admin Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Journal, Harvard Business Review, and many others. She's a sought-after keynote speaker with a worldwide following. So curiosity features very prominently in the new book, Amy. How important is being curious?
It's probably job one, right? I think curiosity, I talk about, curiosity and vulnerability and humility and empathy even, but curiosity, maybe because it's the most cognitive, which is where I'm most comfortable. But, curiosity is the driver of all of the rest, right? Because without curiosity, we're just less likely to remember to ask good questions, to remember to kind of experiment, see if this works, right? To keep asking ourselves and each other the question of what would happen if? What if we tried this?
And I love how the subtitle of the book, The Science of Failing Well. I rather like, because I think you are sort of redefining your relationship with failure. Yes, okay, we don't just want, I guess, to make the basic or simple mistakes or fails as much as we can avoid those.
The book is as much about, in fact, I haven't added up the pages in this way, but there's probably even more pages devoted to the prevention of preventable failures, right? The basic failures and the complex failures that we can and must work hard to prevent take up a fair amount of space in the book. Whereas the intelligent failures are the ones I think we need to work hard to promote and to increase the frequency of. And by extension, if we have more intelligent failures and fewer basic and complex failures, then the ratio will be much healthier too. The ratio of intelligent failures to the rest should be dramatically higher.
Exactly. I think you've been a career-long curious person, Amy. How would you define curiosity?
Gosh, it's probably a formal definition that you guys are familiar with, but I think it's just a drive to learn, a drive to know more, and maybe a recognition of the inevitable presence of gaps, of things you don't yet know.
There's always something you don't know that's worth exploring. I love that. Yeah, very, very nice. May we be cheeky and ask, what are you curious about at the moment? Maybe something professional, something personal?
Well, gosh, at the moment, I'm curious about when my voice will ever come back to normal.
Right. You and all of us.
This has been a very long wait. Well, I am curious about AI. I'm certainly curious about what the opportunities and the risks are going to prove themselves to be in the coming months and years. And I'm also curious. I mean, I'm trying to force myself to be just curious rather than despondent about the kind of global and political drift toward authoritarianism and giving up on the project of self-governance.
Is that a future book in either of those areas?
Yeah, not probably. It's going to exceed my expertise for a good long time, but there is something in there. I mean, there's something in my wheelhouse and your wheelhouse in that fundamentally, these breakdowns are a breakdown in curiosity, right? A breakdown in desire to mutually, to learn together and to develop greater understanding and appreciation, not only of each other, but almost of possibilities in the world. Like, what I keep thinking, what could we do if our primary goal was how do we make the world work? Rather than our primary implicit goal being how do we beat the other guy? And it's like a fundamentally different way of thinking and operating in the world. And it seems to me to have gotten, more rare rather than more common. And we need it to be more common.
I think it's extrapolating that the research that Francesca Gino did around curiosity looked at the benefits for team working and the benefits for communication. And if that works at a micro level, I wonder if that could work at a macro level with some of these geopolitical challenges.
I think so. I mean, Chris Argyris, who was one of my great mentors, his work was all on learning, organizational learning. But his observation was we have a sort of programming, which he called Model 1, that sort of programs us to want to win. I don't want to win an argument. I want to win an interaction rather than to learn. The programming involves, face saving rather than essentially generating new opportunities, new possibilities. And it's so strong. He says it's so strong. It's cognitively strong. It's socialized in us. And it's an ongoing project to kind of overcome that and be Model 2. And Model 2 was kind of learning oriented and fundamentally creative, wanting to create more value, together and for the world.
And the media and the social media doesn't help. As soon as you put a foot in some place, everything is amplified 1,000, 1,000,000 fold.
Yeah.
I wonder in organizations if there's something to learn there as well. Why some people want to hide their experiments a little, going back to that and wanting to try and succeed.
Social media seems to me almost a codification of Model 1 thinking, right? Because it's all about proving, winning, more likes, right? It's not about mutual learning and course correcting and being wrong in the right kinds of ways.
So something we do on the podcast, Amy, is offer the opportunity to ask us some questions. So is there anything you'd like to ask us?
Well, yeah. How do you alter curiosity or nurture curiosity? What are your best strategies for that?
Yeah,
techniques.
Echoing, I think, a lot of what you said. So asking questions. Creating the psychological safety to be able to experiment, to be able to try things, to be able to fail, creating that environment in the team so that people feel they can be curious, creating the incentives for people to be curious. So very, very much aligned with many of the things that you've talked about, which I guess is encouraging.
Yes, yeah.
One of the ones we talk about in the book is confidence. We have these 7 C's of curiosity, Amy, which are, I suppose, dotted around the things that you and Simon have just mentioned. But one at the end is confidence, which I wanted to come back and ask you about again, to sort of turn it straight back to you. That one of the things we found during the research is confidence comes from learning you can do it when things are going wrong. Not just that you can do it when things are going right. Don't just practice to succeed, but practice to also fail. Do you see some parallels there? Did you look into confidence at all?
I talk in the book about failure muscles. I mean, playfully, right? It's not a real thing, but it's a metaphor. Because if you haven't failed at something, you have the exact opposite of confidence, right? You're terrified, right? Because it's around the next corner might be that failure. And it's only after, experiencing failure and realizing, oh, I'm okay, right? I'm still here and all is well. And I learned, and it actually took me somewhere new and interesting and good that builds those, those failure muscles, which is in fact, which is a kind of confidence. And that's why, people say, and I think it's true, that sports are a really good arena in which to develop failure muscles as well as regular muscles, because in any sport that you take up, there will be both successes and failures, right? There's never it's simply an impossibility to only succeed, to only win. And so it gives people who get, very serious in team sports or even individual sports, have far more experience than the rest of us in having those failures, living through them, and realizing they're okay. In fact, they learn something and they go on, and it's part of their ultimate, championship success.
It makes me think is whether there's anything we need to change in the school system to actually encourage that sort of failure earlier. You mentioned in the book around the case study with IDEO and how they were hiring sort of all these super bright people who have been incredibly successful through their schooling, and then they're put into an environment where they need to be failing in order to be able to innovate fast, and that's really hard. So is there something we could be or should be changing in our education system?
I mean, maybe, science, certainly a lot of times science is taught as, here's the experiment, follow it. And it's already a known thing, right? It's not a real experiment. It's just a demonstration project. And I think that's true in doesn't have to be just science. It can be creative writing. It can be non-creative writing, history writing. But to really show people how their successes, their capabilities grow from the failures as much as from the successes, right? So if you get as a kid, you don't want to get the red mark on your paper, but if you learn to see the red mark, my mother was a teacher and she had a colleague who called herself Mr. Red Pen. I don't know why Mr. But anyway. And it was, but it was really to make that point that the red pen is your friend, right? If you're not getting any red ink, you're not learning. You're not stretching. You're not getting any feedback. You're not getting anything useful out of this exercise.
I love that. I have to be honest, because that again is a fundamental shift in how we approach, let's call it failure, but in the end, just learning something. Yeah. Right. And
it's a reframe.
And if you teach that into children, then as we get older and older in our lives and in our careers, then of course, seeing a bit of a red mark on our copybook perhaps isn't going to be quite so devastating.
Gift,
we might be exactly.
It means the teacher cared enough, right? Because if you have no red marks, it's like, what did they do? Did they even read it? Did they? I'm 8 years old. Is my paper perfect? No, I'm not a professional writer. I'm a little kid. So if there's no red, it's a mark of not caring rather than a mark of perfection.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business, and behaviorism about curiosity, and it makes these useful for everyone. So we're coming towards the end of our time. We've covered an awful lot just looking back through my notes, and we've gone from your career being essentially all about curiosity and not having that grand plan, but sort of following your nose along the way, how the role of management and leadership has changed to be more hypothesis-driven, and the answer is no longer there. We can't just break things down and execute and follow the way that we did before. And now we need to learn from what's actually happening. Two things are how we need to ask questions and how we need to set in place rituals and activities to be able to shape, and some great examples that you shared with us. We looked at how curiosity is sort of more of an individual trait, and then the impact of generative AI and how people can tackle that. So asking the question of, I wonder what might be the risks, what might be the opportunities, and getting in there to play. We talked about then the content of the new book, so particularly the 3 types of failure around basic, complex, and intelligent failures, and how we don't want those basic failures, but we do want lots more of the intelligent or good, positive failures. We need those to outnumber the others. We dived into psychological safety and how hard that is. We talked about smart pilots. We went into how we need to rethink completely pilots, and so I think that's going to be a hard one for many of us when we think about a pilot. It's not that it needs to be successful. It needs to actually be something we can learn from. And that's a complete mindset that I think mindset shift that we all need around pilots. We looked at mutual learning. We looked at how psychological safety isn't about being nice. It's actually around candor. It's not about getting a round of applause, and it doesn't have to be comfortable. That maybe we need to be comfortable with the discomfort around it. And then we dive deeper into to curiosity, it being around the drive to learn, the drive to know more, and some of the things that you're currently curious about. So covered a lot. If there was one thing from all of that, Amy, to leave our listeners with, is there one takeaway you'd like to leave everyone with?
Wow. Well, maybe that's such a great recounting. I don't know how you did that. I think the takeaway might be, well, I have two. One is that our spontaneous ways of thinking about our situations are usually unhelpful, and we can rise to the occasion of sort of rethinking, right? Reframing and approaching it in a new way. Generally, that's one with curiosity. And maybe the other just big takeaway is that what we're really talking about is navigating uncertainty. Uncertainty is here to stay, and we can't navigate it effectively by pretending it's not there. We got to really put it front and center and approach it with a sense of realism and curiosity.
I love that. So lots of homework for us all.
Yeah. Well, easier said than done.
Indeed. But there's lots of guidance in here, though, with hints and tips on how to do that. So I
love seeing the little placeholders there.
I've been busy scribbling all over it. So there's lots of valuable lessons in there. So massive thank you, Amy. It's been a great
Very
conversation,
welcome.
And thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're always curious to hear from you. If there was something valuable or useful from this conversation, we encourage you to write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel, saying what this was and why and what you've learned from it. We always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. So join us today at #CuriousAdvantage. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.